From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
This week on Newsmakers, the post-mortem on the 2011 legislative session. In an at times testy and heated debate.
You understand? Before you turn, if you don't turn my microphone, turn his mic off.
State lawmakers tackled a punishing budget deficit, sidestepped same-sex marriage with civil unions, and took on other issues like the I-195 Redevelopment Commission. But it ain't over until Treasurer Gina Raimondo's Pension Advisory Group sings. A special legislative session is slated for the fall, primarily to tackle the broken state retirement system, but it leaves the door open to other unfinished business like binding arbitration. Our guest this week on Newsmakers, House Speaker Gordon Fox.
Good morning. Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Joining me this week on the panel, WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi and political reporter for WRNI Rhode Island Public Radio Ian Donis. First, we want to mark the passing of a Rhode Island legend, Bruce Sundlun. A passionate and fiery politician, the former two-term governor is probably best known for his handling of the Rhode Island banking crisis. Sundlun, a decorated war hero and accomplished businessman, died this week at his Jamestown home surrounded by family. Bruce Sundlun was 91 years old. Speaker Fox, good morning. I want to start with former Governor Sundlun. You were a freshman state rep when Governor Sundlun began his second term.
That's correct.
Part of that big changeover after the banking crisis. From your perspective as a freshman legislator, who was Bruce Sundlun?
Bruce Sundlun. If you remember Bruce Sundlun, he's just first thing comes to mind is this dynamism, moving things forward. He used to always tell me, always push forward, push forward. He's actually the first governor I served with, as you said, the only Democratic governor I've ever served with. And I've been going into my 20th year. He's the only, who would think in a blue state like Rhode Island. But Bruce has been, I worked on his campaigns actually, up the 86, the 88 campaign. The 88 campaign, I remember, was we thought we had it, and I was just getting involved in politics at the time. Then I was elected in 1992. Bruce was always a mentor, a supporter. And I remember I went right on finance as a freshman. I remember, if you remember those days, we were turning lights off the streets, tough economics, trying to come out of some real difficult times. And Bruce was always talking about investment, the airport. I mean, the Providence Place Mall, moving rivers, the PPAC, expanding the theater to bring in real Broadway shows. And it really struck me, like, Governor, we're cutting programs, we're turning lights. Why are we doing this? And one of the greatest lessons, this is the time to do it. When times is toughest is when government has to step in, has to invest, and when you have down markets is when it's cheaper to actually do bonding or whatnot. He goes, that's the very time, my boy, is when you do invest. And I can remember him telling me that, and I think he's absolutely right.
Well, that's telling, isn't it? We are in a very tough economic time right now, and in fact, one of the biggest problems that we face, that you face, is the pension problem. You'll be back in the fall for a special session to tackle the state, and maybe we'll see the municipal pension problems depending on where it goes. I just want to cut to the quick on this one. Are cuts to retiree benefits inevitable?
I mean, obviously, you know, General Treasurer Gina Raimondo has her working group commission. She's spoken about it, and we're committed, myself and President Paiva-Weed in the Senate have committed to come back for a fall term. Part of that decision to come back in the fall term and not deal with the pension issues during the traditional legislative session was just so that Treasurer Raimondo has time to have her working group look at, bring the experts together, bring interested parties together to sort of create a game plan. Obviously, it's going to be the General Assembly with a up or down veto signing it by the governor who actually have to enact anything. We don't shrink from that role. In fact, we've done some pension reform over the past couple of years that I think has led to Rhode Island being in a better fiscal position, so even though it's tough fiscally. But I think we're going to have to tackle that.
You're no amateur on this, though.
No.
I mean, back to that question. You have tackled this before.
Right.
You're House Majority Leader, I think, last time. Do you think pension benefits are a property right? It's the heart of the problem here.
Well, that is the heart of the property right. And if you know, I've always treated it as sort of three distinct groups. We always dealt with the 10 and under, the sort of non-vested. And the last pension reform, it was still in court. We crossed that first line, if you would, and went into folks and made pension benefits changes to the age of retirement for the COLA cap to people that were above the 10 years. That was the first time that was done. So we crossed that bridge. That's still, I believe it's in front of Judge Taft-Carter now. There's still those iterations coming out of it. The last hurdle, the Rubicon I call it, is those that are already receiving benefits. And that cuts both ways. And I think that's why, we have tough decisions. We want to keep a viable pension systems, as well as we balance that with what are the rights of people to those pensions. I mean, I know that we hear a lot of news headlines about people that are making $100,000 pensions, and is that right, wrong, and do they deserve it? But the vast majority of pensions are much lower. So you're getting to the point, I know that we've seen a little canary in the mine shaft with Central Falls. Some of those pensioners, I mean, who are asking now in order to make cuts, like we receive half their pension benefits, receiving pensions of probably $20,000, $30,000. So it gets to the point you're going to have a class of people that relied upon to get $20,000, $30,000, which is not a lot of money in this tough times we have in the way the standard of living are. Are they going to be living on $10,000, $15,000, and what are the ramifications of that? So I'm not prepared to say it is a property right, because if one thing I hope I've proven to folks is I think, and these are lessons I did learn from Governor Sunland when he, remember, people forget what he tackled with the workers' comp reform, that we had a workers' comp system that was anti-business. You had no workers' comp insurers in the state, and vis-a-vis the benefits that provided for injured workers was going to be a problem. So both from a business standpoint as well as rights to people that need those benefits, he had to tackle that very early in the 1990s. And when I came in, the rep right after that, I learned those lessons. I lived those lessons. I draw on that experience. I think pensions are very much the same way. So we're going to see what the Working Commission does, keep all options open. So I'm not prepared to hear today say that is a guaranteed property right, because I know that we may not be able to afford it. And I think Judge Flanders vis-a-vis Central Falls, I think it is a haircut better than a beheading. At some point, those are the Hobson's choices we're going to have to make. So at this point, I won't say it's a property right. I am open to every option. I know that the House of Representatives and the Senate as well is open to every option. We're committed to tackling this problem. We understand that it is really going to be a juxtapositioning of the economic well-being of our cities and towns in this state, and what that means for ongoing generations, for bringing businesses, to having a thriving economy, a thriving society here. But it has to be juxtaposed. People have to rely on benefits, and you may do more harm than good if you just throw all pensions out.
Mr. Speaker, we know the House and the Senate usually don't like to get in each other's business, but the Joint Committee on Legislative Services is supposed to make all State House hiring decisions, and the House controls 3 of the 5 seats on the JCLS. So do you plan to take any action regarding the situation of the Senate aide, Stephen Iannazzi, who's described by critics as a poster child for State House cronyism?
Well, it is your right purpose of JCLS, and we have a working relationship. We have Senate House staff. I mean, I don't know if it's quite fair what's been happening to Mr. Iannazzi. I mean, I know that you constantly have to improve practices, and we've done that. I mean, we've cut the General Assembly budget by $800,000, committed to doing that. I mean, I was one of the rare speakers that came in and removed people from jobs, trying to look at reorganization, how you better utilize folks in the best categories and get the best benefit out of those, as well as pay a fair wage for those. I know that the Iannazzi situation has been all over the press and media, and it's been used as that. But, I mean, I don't like to get personal and name names. I think it's unfair to the individual. In this particular case, I think it's unfair to him. I know that we are committed, myself and Senator Piva-Weed, to reorganizing, relooking at the House, just modernizing. It's amazing how antiquated personnel systems are in the General Assembly. So rather than focus on one individual person, I think we have to focus on, and how do we get good staff, retain good staff? Is it a classified system? Is it not classified system?
Mr. Speaker, without getting personal on Mr. Iannazzi, and I understand that concern, it is one of those tangible examples for the public to look at it, to look at Smith Hill and have some concerns there. Do you think Rhode Islanders are wrong to be concerned that such a hiring suggests a culture of corruption on Smith Hill?
I would never say Rhode Islanders are wrong. I mean, I think what they are demanding, and especially in these difficult times they become highlighted, is they want transparency. They want to make sure that the government is doing everything they can to spend their money, because it is their money, as wisely and as effectively as possible. And I think the Iannazzi hiring, as well as raises, I mean, I'll put it on the table, raises that I had given out to my chief of staff and other folks were scrutinized in looking at that. But it has to be in a context, as I let a lot of people go, and I gave a lot of people new responsibilities. So it's not just focused on, well, this person got a 3% raise, so somehow that in of itself is wrong. I think you have to look at a more broad discussion and look at all the decisions that went into whether it was his situation, whether it was the pay raises that I had given out, because I think We're trying to be responsible. Yes, the systems
Just a
need to
real
be
quick-
updated. We're committed to doing that.
Mr. Speaker, a quick follow-up. Do you support the establishment of a classification system so the salaries of legislative employees are set to specific job descriptions and not necessarily the whims of legislative leaders?
Oh, I think it's important, but I think it's also important in terms of like to keep good talent. We've implemented, it's been there for years in terms of our House fiscal staff. There's gradations of, and there's upward mobility. You come in at a certain and define that. I'm looking to expanding that to other state employees, but that's the symptom of the system. That was put into place in one office, and I think anyone that's dealt with the House Fiscal Office knows that you get good, committed, intelligent, dedicated people that work hours and hours, professional hours. And I think that's a model that can be replicated. So I think you're right. I think you need to have defined salaries for defined positions, defined classifications for jobs, all the things that are the norm in personnel systems. For whatever reason, the State House hasn't always been good at doing that. This is my first full year as Speaker. I think I've already demonstrated that I'm committed to doing so, and we're going to continue to do so. And I know that Senator Piper-Weed is committed to the same.
Mr. Speaker, the lawmakers rejected Governor Chafee's request for $6.8 billion to bail out Central Falls and cover its deficits in recent years. You know, back in the 70s, President Ford blocked a bailout for New York City, and the famous New York Daily News headline was "Ford to City, drop dead." Would the headline this time be "Fox to Central Falls, drop dead"?
Not at all. You mean Central Falls is, and especially the people of Central Falls, are wonderful people. I mean, I think Central Falls, and I've used the term as I think unfortunately is not the rare black swan. I think it's the canary in the mine shaft. That there are symptoms that we can learn from. I put together a municipal commission to start looking at, in the context of Central Falls, what may be going on in other cities and towns that we don't know about. Because Central Falls all of a sudden popped on the scene about 2 years ago that it couldn't sustain its budget. I mean, a lot of that's driven by pension obligations. A lot of it's driven by it's a community that has a limited tax base. I think the average single-family home there's about 130,000. Average wage there's less than 30,000.
What was the thinking though about when that money was in front of you and you guys had to make the decision? What was the thinking?
It was a tough one because Ted, in terms of the context of a budget, it ultimately comes from robbing Peter to pay Paul. We made a decision in terms of not raising taxes with very limited, that we have to live within the $7.7 billion. And unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, but you get a competition for what, if you're going to have certain pie, how do you carve that pie up? Central Falls asked for, I believe it was just under $2 million for the past fiscal year, about $4 million for the going fiscal year. But the big problem in making the case was there was no plan going forward. Are you throwing good money after bad? What is the plan for Central Falls? What is the receiver? What is the town looking at? Is there a discussion about the governors and others have thrown out annexation? Is it a consolidation of services with other towns by having Central Falls keep it? So to make the case to throw money in that, okay, you may get them over the hurdle for the next 4, 5, 6 months, but with no plan thereafter, what's the plan then? Come back and ask for more money? Plus there was other issues. We understood that, as you know, the state runs their school system, that they were asking for about, I think it was really about $1.8 million for the last fiscal FY11, when we found out they had a $2 million surplus in the school department. And it's like, well, where's the real information coming from? So it's not about throwing Central Falls under the bus. We are committed to making sure we work with Central Falls. I've been in several meetings on Central Falls and trying to find a lasting solution, because I think it's not only about Central Falls, it's about every other city town in the state as well. And so we all have a vested interest in Central Falls.
Speaker, a couple of minutes before break here, I want to talk to you about binding arbitration. You had an editorial in the Providence Journal this week. In it, you stated, quote, "I was not convinced that binding arbitration was the best means to resolving open-ended labor contract disputes in the schools and preventing teacher strikes." You go on to say you're going to continue to look at this issue and try to forge a solution that recognizes taxpayers and, of course, the needs of the students. And this was in explanation of why binding arbitration did not go to the floor for a vote. The sentence in there that stuck out to me, not the best means to resolving labor contract disputes. Does that translate into we will not be seeing binding arbitration come back in the fall legislative session?
I don't anticipate it'll be in the fall legislative session. I know that myself and the Senate President, we're really committed to keeping it on pension. It's everywhere we come in the fall. There may be some issues, house cleaning, that come up. I think binding arbitration is something that's deserving of study. We saw what happened in East Providence, where it was management that brought that to impasse and then deemed the contract is over, so they started making unilateral changes in terms and conditions of employment and whatnot, and led to a lot of court battles. I think some of it's still pending. It diametrically had a negative effect on morale in the classroom, and I think we all should be committed. The best way of educating our kids is the teacher in front of them that's prepared, supported, and feels like they're supported. I think these are the types of issues that can kill morale, can lead to a lot of expense outside, rather than going into the education system, being spent outside the education system. So within the context of binding arbitration, I think it is a valid if you're going to have collective bargaining, and I still believe in collective bargaining, if you're going to have collective bargaining, there has to be a way, if there are contract disputes, to bring those disputes to some sort of conclusion quickly, with the best interest of the taxpayers in the communities that they exist in, but also with a highlight in terms of the parents and the school children that are going to be going to those schools. So I believe there is merit. There needs to be some system in place. Going to court and just spending thousands and thousands, in some cases hundreds of thousands of dollars, in a long duration of court battles isn't the solution.
House Speaker, we have to take a break here. We're at the break. When we come back, we'll continue this conversation with House Speaker Gordon Fox. Stay with us. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. To my right, Ian Donis and Ted Nesi. And our guest this week, we welcome House Speaker Gordon Fox. Speaker, referring back to that editorial you wrote, quote, "The General Assembly also made substantial strides this year in transparency." You go on to point out that the General Assembly is now putting their votes online. With all due respect, Speaker, isn't that like patting yourselves on the back from going from 1975 to 1999? In other parts of the country, and transparency is a very important issue, other states are far more transparent. Alaska released Sarah Palin's emails when she was governor. You come here, Ted and I, trying to get the emails of former Mayor David Cicilline as we were examining the financial crisis in Providence, and we were denied access to those emails because it's exempt under our public records law. In fact, any document with someone's name on it is closed from inspection. Specifically to that, do you think emails of politicians, not including those with constituents, should be public?
Oh, you ask loaded questions.
I don't think that's loaded.
In terms of, it's a good question. It's actually a great question, and it's something. It's one of those issues. I know Representative Marcello put a bill in. It's one of those things that, with so many issues at the end, we just ran out of oxygen in the room, ran out of time.
As that bill always does every single year.
Well, no, this year I think it was vetted more. The committee had a better hearing on it. You know the rub. It's always in terms of the access to the public against the privacy rights of individuals, and that's the rub historically. And you want to make sure, and that's why when they first put, and I call it a cobbled together piece of legislation, the current law on access to public records is a cobbled piece that has over time just been added to, subtracted from, because it's this whole issue of, as technology improves, it seems in hyperspeed, laws try to catch up to it. Laws are generally behind it. And so I think it does deserve a real look at. It does deserve a universal look at. Email's one of those changes in technology.
Speaker, should they be public?
I'm not going to say here that I think they should be public because, again, I think some should be, and maybe some shouldn't be. But I don't want to have a point where, because we know that, yes, you can do some harm with information. And I don't want to see somebody individually hurt because, and so that's why it's a difficult one for me, because I truly believe in transparent government. I truly believe people have a right to know, but it's got to be augmented or softened by the fact that there are certain documents, and I can't tell you right now what emails shouldn't be. I know they were talking about if they're work product or if they are from a constituent. Well, I know if we're going to have a law saying that email should be made public, most of the stuff that comes into my office would be exempted. So what are we doing? Because it comes from constituents, and that would be my main concern. And I know that Rep. Marcello did that. If someone emails me, for instance, and wants to talk about a horrendous situation with their child's access to benefits for autism,
the question was excluding.
Should they be public? I don't think those people, Speaker, and I don't want to chill those people from reaching out to me. And we were talking about binding arbitration. You mean in terms of that? Over 2,200 emails came in from folks about not wanting binding arbitration, which made a huge impact on my decision not to go forward with this because the public didn't want it. But I don't want to have...
We're not talking about constituents, we're talking about the operation of government here. Should any document that shows how government operates be public?
But again, the exception may eat the rule. And you may have work product and consider. The point I'm making is we pat ourselves on the back, and you said about transparency, self-serving. I could put it and say, okay, work product and constituents mails are going to be out. So we did something for emails. Then the next thing you're going to happen is say, well, you only gave us 2 emails out of what we think is 250.
That would be a huge improvement.
Well, you think so? I don't know.
And so more than we got in Providence.
That's right. That's what I mean by that.
I don't know the Providence situation. I'm not familiar with that. But I would say that I start off the premise with that everything should be public. And I know that and I would support that change in the law that right now everything is deemed private unless proven otherwise. That I think is an important shift. That I am committed, that I would support that shift. But within that, I don't want to see what we've got right now as a cobble together. If you've ever read that law, it's accepted for this, but not when it's this, but if it's that, but then you can't, and I'm an attorney, and to read it and to vet through it, it's very difficult.
Let me ask you this. A recent CNBC study called Rhode Island the worst state for doing business. Is that an accurate assessment? And if not, why does that perception exist?
Oh, well, I think, it's like trying to turn a cruise liner. I mean, it takes time to turn it. I think that's very much would have been something I would say was probably true. I mean, as early as a few years ago. I hope that because we're looking at pensions and we're tackling those, we're looking at balancing budgets and living within our means, that we're changing the notion. When I talk to business folks, they really want to know, more so than I want a special break or whatnot, I want to know that I'm coming into a place that has a stable tax basis, that's not going to kill whatever initiative that I may have in my entrepreneurial spirit by taking every dollar I make from there, that has a trained workforce. So we're getting better at that. I think all of those go towards improving business climate. It's not just someone saying, well, they have high taxes, so we don't want to, so they're a bad business state. I think, again, everything is in the details, and I think you have to look at workforce. We're doing better at that. Myself and President Piva-Weed 2 years ago, we're dealing with CCRI, making that into a real mission change in terms of workforce development. We're reading in today's papers in terms of the unemployment levels, which is still too high at over 10%. They're talking about training of workforce. So all of that's going to go into changing that dynamic of how Rhode Island's perceived. I think sometimes those reports lag, and I think that we're getting better and better, and I feel good in terms of the business people I talk about. Look at the Hasbro moving jobs into downtown Providence in terms of $24 million investment there that they made, that because they think we're making right decisions about where we're going with tax base, the combined reporting in this year's budget. I know that really sold them on the fact that they're committed to doing the responsible, even though we had a lot of pressure to do combined reporting, corporate cheats and all this, corporate welfare and whatnot, that you've got to study this. You have to look at it, and you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So when you talk to people like Brian Gold at Hasbro, they're committed to Rhode Island. They're committed to making better investments in terms of what we're doing with the 195 land, in terms of opening that up to a knowledge-based economy, bringing that commission together, bringing that to a conclusion that's going to build confidence in how that land is distributed, because that's the linchpin of this whole knowledge district. I know Mayor Taveras and others in state government, Governor Chafee is committed to, as myself and the Senate President Piva-Weed. But I can go on forever. I can go on forever with this stuff.
Right after the show, we'll chat. This one's a tough one, but people at the State House often, the whispers are that you and Senate President Piva-Weed have a very tense relationship. How would you characterize that?
Oh, I don't think we have a tense relationship. Sometimes we have an intense relationship. I always say in some ways we're siblings. Meaning, I think she's a dear lady, and it's like any nature of anything. We have two institutions. We have our squabbles, and we wouldn't be human beings if we didn't. Senator Piva-Weed and I are from the same age group. We served together as she was Senate Majority Leader when I was House Majority Leader for like 5.5 years together. We spent a lot of time together. I used to always joke to the senators that I should get a vote for the Senate Majority Leader because I spend more time with her than some of them do. So it's not tense. We have our moments, and I'm sure she'd say the same. But we always find a way, and what's really important to me, we always find a way to work together. We always find a way, notwithstanding our squabbles, to come back, because I know she's committed to the well-being of the state of Rhode Island. I'm committed to the well-being of the state of Rhode Island. We may have, like anybody, even at this panel, different definitions of what that means and how to accomplish that. But I think ultimately, if we stay focused on what we think is positive and we work it out, I think the 195 was a perfect example. Senator Ruggiero took a lead on getting that through. He took a lot of hits on that bill. But I don't think if Senator Ruggiero and Senator Piva-Weed hadn't taken that initiative, I think we would have still been wallowing, like, what should we do about 195? So that initiative, and then they passed that bill, which then created the context for us to work around it, which I think now is a fine piece of legislation that they didn't just hand it to me. We were discussing it through, working it through. They were working it through with us. So I think that's what we need to focus more on, Ted, that we do have our squabbles, but Senator Piva-Weed and I are dear friends. We have great respect for one another, and we have great love for the state of Rhode Island.
Speaker, what did you tell the governor before drop-kicking his sales tax plan?
I'll say, the governor, I must say, I enjoy working with Governor Chafee. And it was just a couple of parameters. It was so widely not well received in terms of the business community, in terms of the general population, that it's seen as a tax increase. Now the governor, and he's a committed man, is saying, well, it's going to decrease it, but in those areas that had not been previous tax, it's a tax increase. So when you hear that people don't want it, and then I, as a policymaker, have to assess that, and could maybe at some point support a tax increase if it's solved an out-year deficit. But when you looked at what his initial budget was, you had about $165 million made up in these taxes. By 4 years, you still had $500 million deficit. It wasn't solving the problem.
It already was a tax increase because people are seeing higher car taxes. People are seeing...
Well, I mean, it's in anything. You can only do so much. And in terms of, we have to solve the state budget first. When they say they see higher car taxes, I mean, we did have to stop the excise motor vehicle tax a couple of years ago because we didn't have the funds to do it. But that message was then, yes, it went back to the cities and towns, you will not get this reimbursement, but adjust accordingly. Make the cuts accordingly. Deal with your problems accordingly because the state can't keep sending this. So it's part of those different levels, Tim, and you're right. No one wants to just say, okay, look what wonderful job we did at the state budget where we rolled it down on the backs of the local communities.
1 minute left.
And I think that's what you saw this year when you looked at it as one of the main changes is that we changed retiree health benefits on the municipal level.
Speaker, I'm going to stop you there. Your predecessor, Bill Murphy, put a self-imposed term limit on his tenure as Speaker. Do you plan to do the same thing? And how much time do you envision spending as Speaker?
I'm not going to put a self-imposed limit. I think that there's enough limits at some point, and we never know when that is. The chamber lets you know when it's time to go. I don't think I'm anywhere near there, and I love what I'm doing, and as long as they'll have me, I would like to stick around.
House Speaker Gordon Fox, we are out of time on Newsmakers, and we do hope that we have you back more frequently. It's good to check in with you, and if you missed any of this program, you can watch it on our website, WPRI.com. Look for it under the on-air section. I want to thank House Speaker Gordon Fox. For Ian Donis and Ted Nisi, I'm Tim White. We will see you next week on Newsmakers.